Hey everybody, Mr. Regan here, and we're looking at our last story problem here that deals with our simulator and a collision that occurred. And let's go ahead and take a look at what we're trying to figure out. Did object A or B experience the strongest force when the collision occurred? If we're looking at our diagram here, we have object A and B, and if we notice that they're going to be colliding with the objects across from them, so A collides with C, B collides with D. And these are our objects before, and these are our objects after the crash. And what we have to decide and figure out is which of our objects, A or B, experienced the strongest force when collision occurred. Now, if you look down here underneath the collision diagrams, you'll see that we have some information about their mass. Object A and B both have the same mass. On top of that, object C has a mass of 1 kilogram, so they also have the same mass as A and B. And then object D has a mass of 2 kilograms. So A is colliding with an object that is the same mass as it. B is colliding with an object that is larger than it, and then A and B are both the same mass. When we look at our velocity charts down here, we can see that object C had a starting velocity of 1 before the collision, and then after the collision, its current velocity is 3. So it changed by 2, it sped up by 2. When we look at object D, on the other hand, it had a starting velocity of 1, and it also changed its velocity to 3 and changed by a velocity of 2, so 2 centimeters per second. So we have to decide, looking at our objects A and B that have the same mass, after they collide, we have to decide which one of these had the strongest force applied to it in the collision based on object C's velocity change and based on object D's velocity change. So take a second, decide. Do you think object A had the strongest force when it collided? Did object B have the strongest force when it collided? Or did both objects experience the same strength force? Take a second, pause the video, select your answer. When you're ready to go over it, unpause the video. All right, do you think you got the right answer? Let's take a look. So, first and foremost, when we think about our key concept here, we have to understand that even though the forces exerted on each object in a collision is the same strength, if the objects have different masses, their changes in velocity will be different. So when these two objects collide, they're going to experience the same strength force pushing each other in the opposite direction. So A and C are going to experience the same strength force, and then B and D are going to experience the same strength force. So just because we don't know A or B's change in velocity, we can use C and D's change in velocity to figure out which one A or B had the strongest force. Because remember, whatever force was applied to D and C was applied to A and B. So let's take a look at our velocity changes here. So D went from 1 to 3, and it has a larger mass. We have an object that has more mass that changed by a velocity of 2. And then we have object C, which changed its velocity from 1 to 3. So it changed by 2. So we have two objects that change their velocity the same. But object D is larger in mass compared to object C. So whatever force caused these two objects to change by 2 also caused these objects to change. Question is, which one had the larger mass? Well, we know that if an object has a larger mass, it's going to take more force to change its velocity compared to a lighter object. A lighter object doesn't need as much force. So if both of our objects here have the same change in velocity, then D must have experienced the larger force. It needs a larger force to go as fast as C. So because D experienced a larger force, we know that in a collision, both objects experience the same strength force. So D experienced a larger force compared to C, so then B must experience a larger force compared to A. So the answer here is object B. And you can see that here when you look at the collisions that happen in the sim. Object A and C collided and they had forces of 20 in opposite directions versus B and D had forces of 40 in the opposite direction. So object B experienced the most force, the strongest force, because it had the same strength force as D and because D needs more force to go as fast as C. So that's how we think about and figure out which objects change the most in a collision based on their velocity. If you have questions, reach out. Otherwise, good luck.